The year is 2003 and a teenage version of myself is lying on my parents' hardwood floor, and in horror, I have just thought something I have never thought while watching The Simpsons. That wasn't funny. This moment of devastating disillusionment came midway through season 15, episode 4, when, after getting off a flight to London, the Simpsons are greeted by British Prime Minister Tony Blair before he flies away on a jetpack. By modern Simpsons standards, it's a forgettable joke, but back then, it filled me with a, quite frankly, unreasonable level of rage. For any other TV show, this scene wouldn't have mattered, but this was The Simpsons. This was the most untouchable sitcom of all time. A show so impactful and iconic that even its tiny moments, like a man disappearing into a hedge, are to this day immortalized over and over. Golden Age Simpsons is as close as humanity has come to a perfect season of television. And with that level of hyperbole now in play, you can see how a limp, sanitized visual gag like Tony Blair flying on a jetpack caused an unreasonable level of emotion in a younger version of myself. However, I was not the only one having those moments. As The Simpsons shot past its 10th season, many of the people who'd made it great, including the original creator Matt Groening, left the show, leaving its staff of writers with an impossible task: live up to what The Simpsons had been. A fall so extreme it led to the era known as Zombie Simpsons. In time, what was now deemed Zombie Simpsons bloated to become the vast majority of the show. Even by the most generous standards, classic Simpsons ended around season 10, and from there, the show would limp on for another 25 years. I have spent several decades and practically every major milestone of my life accepting that The Simpsons is bad, that it is an uncanny version of what it used to be, and what was so good about it is never coming back. So imagine my shock when, late last year, I began to hear a quiet but confident murmuring: The Simpsons is good again. It was subtle at first, a whispered recommendation at a con, the ping of a Discord message. A gentle but mounting enthusiasm that would soon explode when earlier this year, a Vulture article was published titled, The Simpsons is Good Again. For those of you saying I stole the title of this article for this video, I did. Please don't be too mean about it. The article looks at how the production of The Simpsons has changed, and how, at least according to the writer of this article, that has resulted in a dramatic increase in quality in the show's most recent seasons, season 33 and 34. But most interestingly to me is how the article states that these new episodes have been praised by everyone, from The Simpsons' original writers to even members of the Dead Homer Society, the blog that originally coined the term Zombie Simpsons. And so, I got curious. In the fall of The Simpsons, I used an aggregate of IMDb episode user review scores to chart the decline in quality of The Simpsons. That was nearly 6 years ago, Jesus Christ, ending at season 28, so I wondered, what would happen if I extend that same measurement into this new era of Simpsons? And immediately, while season 28 was the lowest scoring in the show's history, it is instantly outdone by an all-time low of season 30, averaging only a 6.2 before a slight recovery, which is when we hit what I'm going to refer to as New Era Simpsons, season 33 and 34. And I had to wonder, what heights would this new era of Simpsons soar to? Could we regain the lost glory of season 6? Or even just... Oh fucking god damn it! Jesus, listen to some of these IMDb reviews for season 34. Grr! Who is responsible for last night's monstrosity? He should be forced to apologize on air and then be fired from the show, sterilized, and sent to live like an animal in the sewers below Los Angeles for the rest of his life. Charles, this is coming from someone writing his third video essay on the show. I think you need to chill about The Simpsons. The fact that the needle was so unmoved despite so much sentiment to the contrary left me more unsure of what to do than that time I was fighting a guy and he got a boner. A discrepancy I would spend the next several months trying to reconcile. If I really wanted to assess the quality of new era Simpsons, I would need to experience it myself. But not just that, I would measure it, test it, watch and review each individual episode while also taking note of other variables and assigning each a numerical score. Now, if you're a member of my Patreon Discord and have access to my revolutionary yet highly secretive review hole blog, you'll know I usually score media on a scale of 1 to 7, but that will create too many questions to which only patrons are privy to answers. So I'll be giving each episode a score from 1 to 10 and averaging out those scores across seasons, with either season 33 or 34 needing a minimum average of a 7.0 if we are to declare The Simpsons good again. Any less than that is a humiliating failure. And perhaps you're asking yourself, John, who are you to be the arbiter of quality on The Simpsons? Well, lest we forget, I am the creator of the most watched video essay on The Simpsons in history. So, to answer your question, nobody. However, something was pulling at me. In the time since the fall of Simpsons Video, there had been birthed 2 other seasons. 2 seasons that to Simpsons fans represent a nightmare landscape, strewn with the corpses of gods and where prancing demons wear the faces of the ones you love. Seasons 29 and 30, the 2 lowest rated seasons in the show's history. I would review these also. I would mark the oceanic depths to which the show had plummeted, and from there measure if The Simpsons really had improved. What awaited for me in this duality of abysses? The corpse of something I once loved, or some deeper, more awful truth? They're alright. Okay, no. Season 29 and 30 aren't awful. Most episodes have at least one decent joke or interesting piece of animation, and I actually really liked the Making a Murderer episode, which I scored a 7. But even at their best, the most damning thing I could say about them is that they really feel like a show doing an impression of The Simpsons. Like the show itself is trying to constantly remind you of what it used to be. This uncanny feeling you can see even in the opening. Every frame of this modern opening, which was introduced in season 20, is filled with these little references and nods to classic Simpsons. Like when Maggie shakes her fist at the unibrow baby, that's a callback to an episode that first aired in 1994, nearly 30 years ago, and these episodes are filled with those same kind of golden age references. And what it feels like is the show can't let go of what it used to be, and now has developed this incestuous relationship with itself. Like, I have never felt more like I was watching a show put its feet in its mouth and devour itself Ouroboros style than the moment Homer sends Lisa the hedge meme of himself. The reason this matters is because what we're talking about here is a problem with identity. The Simpsons knows what it was 30 years ago, but as for what the show is now, that is an infinitely more complicated and difficult question. What I mean by this is that the people who were Bart's age when season 1 aired are now older than Homer and Marge. When the show started, the Simpsons were seen as this struggling lower class family, but in the nightmarescape of 2023, they are homeowners with reliable employment. In the early 90s, the Simpsons were a goddamn motherfucking assault on primetime TV. Now, they're about as edgy as this picture I photoshopped of a duck carrying a handgun. So much of what this show is has been stripped away by the relentless passage of time, to the point in 2023 The Simpsons doesn't have an identity beyond the fact that it is The Simpsons, and compounding that problem is that for 750 episodes, the show has mined its world and characters for plot to a soul-numbing degree. There are now 2 episodes about Krusty starting a clown college and getting in trouble with the mafia. This all creates a giant, impossible question. What is The Simpsons in 2023? And I have a lot of sympathy for the writers who have to solve that problem, but I feel like their solution in season 29 and 30 is to 1, constantly remind you of what this show was, and 2, be really silly. Much like smearing a thin layer of grease over your windows so your neighbors can't see you playing Rumble Roses XX, Modern Simpsons uses absurdity to avoid answering difficult questions. My wife walked in as I was editing that, so you all better fucking appreciate that analogy. What I mean by this is that rather than season 29 and 30 ever tackling larger questions about what the show can be in 2023, they're instead just kinda wacky, overloading its plots with zany scenarios that are often about, well, nothing. Take the first episode of season 30. The episode begins on a school jazz recital in which Lisa is performing on stage, and Bart is dared by Jimbo to pull the fire alarm, which he refuses to do, causing him to be ostracized at school, only for him then to be called to the principal's office for not pulling the fire alarm, where for some reason Homer and Marge are there to tell him they are proud of him for not pulling the fire alarm, only for Homer to then secretly tell Bart that he's disappointed he didn't pull the fire alarm, leading to a scene where Bart receives a second dare to jump off Springfield Dam, where Homer tries to save him, only for Lenny to then dare Homer not to save him. And you might be thinking, okay, that's a little all over the place, but it's a reasonably coherent Simpsons episode. Well, you'd be wrong, because everything I just described is only the first 4 minutes. From here, Bart goes into a coma, pretends to see Jesus, and then becomes a religious prophet before a film adaptation of his story is then produced by a Christian film company who hire Homer as the writer and director, only to also hire Flanders as the writer and director. The episode then becoming about Flanders and Homer having to coexist while writing a movie, then about casting the actors that will play the Simpsons in the movie, before going back to being about Bart lying. He actually meets Jesus for real this time, confesses, causes a pure disaster before the episode concludes with Lisa telling Bart that she'll always be there for him, ending on a final conversation about whether God is real. After recounting that episode, I am inclined to believe he is not. My point here is, does this feel like a plot to take our characters on a meaningful emotional journey from point A to point B, or is it a vehicle to allow for as many jokes as possible? If that sounded like a rhetorical question, it was not, and I shall prove it. See, after watching enough of these episodes, I started to notice that something strange was happening. I'd be sitting there watching The Simpsons and gradually find my mind kind of slipping into this sort of flow state that honestly wasn't unpleasant. Now, I also wasn't entertained, and so I just sit there passively consuming The Simpsons. Where this got really strange was that when I read over my notes weeks later, I had barely any memory of the episodes I watched, the episodes that I had written reviews on but couldn't remember. And so, with the low-key fear that I was suffering some kind of extremely gradual stroke, I resolved to discover what was causing this, and when I did, it made me realize what is so broken about these episodes. It started when I took that 4-minute section from earlier and did a little test. Out of curiosity, I counted every single joke within that 4 minutes and measured it at 48 jokes. That was about 12 jokes per minute, which seemed like a lot, so I performed that same test on 10 episodes across season 29 and 30, and take the fact that I did this as a lesson if you have ever wondered how fun I might be in real life. But the result was an average of 118 jokes per episode. That's one joke every 10 seconds, and when I took that same measure across a range of classic Simpsons episodes, it was a third less at 82. What this tells you is that the priority of modern Simpsons isn't plot, character, or narrative. Instead, it's to dump as many jokes on you as possible, to the point that I'd say it's slightly too many jokes, in the same way I'd say a man whose beehive beard has begun to attack him has slightly too many bees. This explains why I found it so difficult to remember these episodes, as trying to recall individual storylines is like trying to remember a man's face who's trapped behind a thick layer of angry bees, and also explains that weird flow state, especially when we ask the question, what is the purpose of smothering an episode in jokes like this? Well, as some of you may have noticed, I am not a writer on The Simpsons, so the actual answer is I don't know. But I do have a theory. I think it's important to note that even if a joke doesn't make you laugh, it does something to you. And so when you are being constantly bombarded by jokes, you are constantly getting these little tiny prods of stimulation. It's the same idea as those TikTok Minecraft videos where you're being fed this little trail of dopamine that's just stimulating enough to keep you trapped in whatever hell pocket of the internet you've wandered into. A joke every 10 seconds means your mind never really has time to wander. You're not thinking about changing the channel or doing something else, you're just kind of placated, and I think that is the purpose of structuring episodes like this, to keep you watching, and I can attest it is effective at that. But the question we then have to ask is, what is the downside of creating episodes that prioritize joke counts like this? And the answer is pretty much everything else. We've already seen how prioritizing joke count creates these frantic nonsense plots, as the plot's main focus now isn't to build a meaningful narrative journey, but to create zany scenarios where those jokes can happen. But it also goes much deeper than that. Because the joke count has to remain so high, it means the type of joke that gets used are these absurd non sequiturs, silly visual gags that can come out of nowhere and just kind of be shoved into a scene as opposed to meaningfully growing from its story or characters, something that would require more dialogue and setup. So instead, we get jokes like Abe is talking to Lisa, Abe walks away, and then Abe appears on Lisa's phone screen, still talking. The joke being, Abe is annoying, I guess. Now, I'm no joke cop, but I think that's pretty weak, and if that sounds like an oddly specific joke to hone in on, I do so because some variant of it happens multiple times across multiple episodes, and is the kind of wouldn't it be silly humor that dominates these seasons. Wouldn't it be silly if a rich guy bowled with champagne bottles? Wouldn't it be silly if a baby danced like Elvis? Wouldn't it be silly if an envelope talked? Wouldn't it be silly if an Irish priest pulled out a leprechaun? Okay, hey, listen, I just want to say that I have literally never had a conversation with another Irish person about leprechauns. That's something Americans pretend we do. Don't know why. So fucking weird. To be fair, classic Simpsons could be pretty zany as well, but critically, those jokes were paced out a lot better and also said something, both of which you can see in one of my all-time favorites, the Gentle Ben talk show. A bear hosting a talk show is a pretty zany idea, and I feel like in the style of modern Simpsons, that would be where this joke would end and we'd move on. But here, we're left marinated in the uncomfortable tension of how bad an idea this is, before the tension boils over with Ben going berserk, the entire scene crescendoing into this ludicrous and horrifying punchline as Ben collapses onto the audience and we cut to this title card. And the thing is, it actually happened. Gentle Ben was a TV show where in one episode, a small child actor was changed to a real 300-pound live bear, making this entire piece not just absurdly hilarious, but this ludicrous commentary on the insane lengths TV executives will and always have been willing to go to in the name of ratings. It's absurd, but it's grounded in meaning and commentary. But modern Simpsons, even outside the jokes, it so rarely feels like modern Simpsons has anything to say, even when it seems like it's trying to. In the episode Bart vs. Itchy and Scratchy, Bart is outraged to see that Itchy and Scratchy is getting a female-led reboot, only for him to join a group of feminist pranksters called Bossy Riot. There's a lot of buzzwords used to try and make it seem like the episode is talking about ideas like gender inequality or men's rights groups, but does so about as convincingly as minute 8 of any To Catch a Predator episode.
Kelly's way too young for me. I came here to tell her that, actually.
That's true, but I was only in there to get directions on how to get away from there.
Instead, Bart just joins Bossy Riot because they too are pranksters, and that plotline is used to drive a lot of zany visual humor, with Bart never given the space to reflect on the issues this episode raises. And honestly, this along with how the show handled the Apu situation, it's just some real coward shit. Like, remember in the season 8 episode Homer's Phobia, when Marge and the kids befriend John, a gay man, and Homer has to spend an entire episode coming to terms with his own internalized homophobia, including a scene where he has his concept of masculinity challenged in one of the all-time best jokes of the show, before realizing that John is actually just a good dude, and the fact that he's gay shouldn't matter. This episode really explored those ideas in a way that was meaningful and fun, and for 90s television, took some real fucking swings. Bossy Riot was made 20 years after this episode, and yet the closest it comes to saying anything is Bart spray painting "The patriarchy is a wiener," which lands with all the political impact of taking one sock off and hurling it at a government building on a windy day. I have no doubt someone at some point wanted to say something with this episode, but feeding a good idea into this format is like feeding a small bird into an industrial strength meat grinder. This is the kind of storytelling that happens when joke count is prioritized over everything else, but an even more insidious effect is how the characters themselves will contort into whatever shape makes those jokes possible. One bizarre episode sees Homer transform into Atticus Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird, and if you think I explained that poorly, you should watch the episode. But the character that suffers from this most is Marge. Marge is a complicated character within The Simpsons. She's brilliant, smart, artistic, and creative, but she's also someone whose life hasn't really worked out like she thought it would. Her own needs frequently squashed by the demands of her children and husband, creating an unfulfilled longing in her, a longing balanced out only by her massive reserves of patience and love for her family. And particularly with Homer, she sees his stupidity, she sees his selfishness, but she also sees the kind person and father he is underneath those things and loves him for it. That is what Marge Simpson is. If you were to write out a list of defining unalterable parts of her, those are the things you would have to include. And season 30 takes that list and Goku Kamehamehas it into the fucking sun. In one episode, we discovered that it has actually been Marge's lifelong dream to be a contestant on a reality TV show. Her and Homer are selected before immediately failing out at the very first task, and confined to the island's hotel for the rest of production, causing Marge to become bitter and resentful towards Homer, getting drunk, lashing out at him, belittling him, flirting with other men in front of him, and even swapping husbands to get back on the show. And Jesus Christ, if we recover that list of scorched remains, we can see how this episode takes that careful, beautiful construction of the Marge Simpson's character and replaces it all with really wants to be on reality TV. And it makes for a truly detestable episode where we see the tender, loving relationship of Marge and Homer replaced by two people who just shouldn't be together. And the result is the uncanny feeling that you are watching a different show wearing the skin of The Simpsons. Ultimately, this is what season 29 and 30 are. They are a reverberation of something that happened a long time ago. They are an echo without an identity, a TV show that feels terrified you'll get bored and change the channel, terrified you're going to forget what this used to be. And so it constantly reminds you, it constantly makes surface level joke after joke after joke to distract you that underneath, whatever was here is gone. I don't think it's awful, but I do think it's something much sadder than that. It's empty. A ghost of this thing that used to exist. As for the final score, when I averaged out the reviews across all episodes, Season 29 scored a 4.9 and Season 30 a 4.4. And as for if there's hope or not, if Season 33 and 34 can be more than that, well, it's time to find. Silent Hill 2 released in 2001 and tells the story of James Sunderland, a man who has just received a letter from his dead wife telling him to return to their special place, Silent Hill, a small lakeside town where the two shared the happiest moments of their lives. And so, James returns to the quiet town, only to find, instead of the place he remembers, something different. Something uncanny and frightening, parts of which resemble his memories, but are also so different and wrong. Frightening, not just because of what they are, but what they aren't. This is a video about The Simpsons. The Simpsons Season 33 began airing May 22nd, 2022. It's been 3 years since Season 30, and in that time, humanity has gone through several major changes, not least of which is the global pandemic. An event that, according to writers of The Simpsons, has caused several major changes in how the show is made. And even watching the first episode of Season 33, which is not even an episode I particularly enjoyed, something definitely felt different. It was the first episode I'd watched for this video where Marge felt like Marge, and everything she did made sense to her character. And the more of these episodes I consume, the more I started to feel those changes everywhere, and particularly in the comedy itself. To show what I mean here, I want to compare two Police Chief Wiggum jokes, one from Season 30 and one from Season 33. In the Season 30 joke, Police Chief Wiggum gets his belly rubbed and acts like a dog. It's silly, that's the joke. But now, compare that to this joke from Season 33, where Wiggum and Lou have been called to a party where a group of teenagers have allegedly gotten drunk.
If I just breathalyzed all these teens, they're all blowing 0.0.
Dear God, they're already dead!
I love this joke, and I do because of how it cuts to the core of Wiggum as a character. The comedy at the heart of Police Chief Wiggum isn't that he's dumb, but that he's this person gifted with massive amounts of power and authority, but is so incompetent, so unable to comprehend even the most basic scenarios, he ends up being a danger to the people he's meant to protect.
Hello, police. This is Marge Simpson. My husband is on a murderous rampage. Over.
Oh, well, thank God that's over. I was worried there for a second.
That's what I think's great about this joke. It's not Wiggum being zany, it's Wiggum being Wiggum. A combination of this character and this scenario, and comedy organically growing from that. In other words, it's a joke that requires time, thought, and setup. And in general, that's what I found with Season 33. It feels much more careful with its comedy. In fact, when I performed that same joke count across Season 33 and 34, that feeling was proved correct, with the average joke count dropping to just 65, half that of Season 30, which is a massive change that directly remedies what was, to me, the biggest problem with modern Simpsons. And the result is jokes that have the room to now actually say things about their stories and characters. For example, take this joke from episode 9.
When's Mommy coming back? She's not. Why not? She's dead. I ought to hold him.
This entire episode is about Homer processing the childhood trauma of losing his mother and how poorly that trauma was handled by Abe. And look at how succinctly this joke distills not just that entire storyline, but but the entire history and relationship of Abe and Homer. Abe as this single father who lacks the emotional intelligence to understand what his son needs from him, and Homer as this scared child who grows up to resent Abe for what he couldn't provide. All that captured by a single punchline. This is what happens when the show actually has time to develop the ideas it raises and draw comedy from them. And it's this change combined with another major change that results in some far more unique and memorable episodes. According to Lonnie Steele Sostand, writers on season 33 and 34 were given far more onus in the writing process, with most writers being responsible for one entire episode a season, the idea being that this would result in more individual and personal episodes. And I think you can really feel that, and particularly in the episode Lisa's Belly, written by Juliet Kaufman. The episode begins with the Simpsons going to a water park where Bart and Lisa catch a virus and are prescribed steroids, which causes them both to gain weight. While Bart's able to pass off the new mass as just being buff, Lisa has a very different experience, and particularly after a single devastating comment from Marge when she refers to Lisa as chunky. From here, we spend the majority of the episode exploring how this one wayward statement festers inside Lisa, a hurt that manifests both in her attitude towards her own body as well as resentment towards Marge, and Marge in turn completely unsure of how to handle Lisa's weight gain, leading to some genuinely pretty funny jokes.
Oh my God. Marge did the one thing no parent is ever supposed to do. Acknowledge what their children look like.
This episode even ending on this bittersweet note about how our parents inevitably fuck us up a little, even despite the best intentions, and how universal an experience that is. You know, I remember when I was a teenager, I was watching Pokemon, and my dad walks in and he told me that I was too old for this, and he asked me, was I going to spend the rest of my life watching cartoons? Well, who's laughing now, Dad? Who's laughing now? Also, I hope you recover from your operation. Get well soon. If this was season 30, a message that personal and nuanced would have been obliterated in a landslide of goofy punchlines just like we saw in Bossy Riot. But you can see how the deprioritization of joke quantity combined with the more personal, individual-focused writing makes for a very different show. But there is a third change that is arguably just as important, one we can see in episode 12. Episode 12 begins with Marge and Homer realizing that their marriage is stuck in a rut, and so they take a romantic getaway, only for things to go awry and they get lost in the wilderness naked. And immediately, that's a pretty zany setup. We get a few comedic scenes of Marge and Homer struggling to survive in the wilderness, but then, 15 minutes in, everything changes. They begin to hear noises outside their hut and realize that they are being stalked by something, only to be attacked by a wolverine. And look at how this thing is animated. Its gnashing teeth, its razor-sharp claws, its violent movements, resulting in this shockingly tense scene where you can really feel the danger Homer and Marge are in. And you're sitting there waiting for the punchline, waiting for something silly to happen to relieve the tension. And you wait, and you wait, and it never comes. The danger only ending when Homer, his club caked in blood, bashes the creature to death. He and Marge collapsing into each other's arms, having gone through this traumatic events, but survived it. Because it doesn't matter if they're swaddled in blankets watching television or fighting for their lives in the wilderness. All they need is each other. The final 2 minutes of the episode is spent on a nearly entirely wordless sequence of Homer and Marge just walking back to civilization together. And it's beautiful. It's the first episode in decades that made me understand why Marge and Homer are with each other. You don't write an episode like this unless you really give a shit about these characters. Even more than that, this episode represents something special in season 33. It's an episode that doesn't feel like classic Simpsons, but is compelling in its own right. Which brings us to the third major change with this season. A directive series showrunner Matt Selman gave his writers to not worry about what made The Simpsons successful in the past, but instead to experiment and push the show in new directions. And you can see that here in how light the episode is on comedy, how viscerally the danger to Homer and Marge is presented, and in how earnestly it depicts them in its final moments. And the result is one of the best Simpsons episodes in decades. Great, not because it feels like classic Simpsons, but because it doesn't. However, there is one other episode. An episode that takes not only that idea of a new and different Simpsons and blasts it into the fucking stratosphere, but combines it with both season 33's character-focused comedy as well as its more personal, unique style of story. And the result is one of the most insane and impactful Simpsons episodes in existence. Everything about A Serious Flanders is unusual. Out of the 750 Simpsons episodes, there are only 4 two-parters, and A Serious Flanders is one of them, and built around a simple question. What happens when you take the Simpsons' moral, virtuous, church-going neighbor, Ned Flanders, and put him in a situation where being good is no longer an option? The plot centers around Flanders finding a large sum of money, which he donates to an orphanage in memory of his equally virtuous grandfather. What Flanders doesn't know, however, is that this money is property of a very old, very dangerous hitman, flanked by 2 ruthless assassins, one of whom is a terrifying French woman and the other a more accurate representation of an Irish person, because while we do not give a fuck about leprechauns, we are nearly universally capable of violent murder. These killers coming to Springfield with the intention of settling their debt with death, setting in motion a chain reaction of increasingly violent events that feels less like an episode of an animated sitcom and more like the season finale of a prestige crime drama, which could be so corny if A Serious Flanders didn't fucking nail it. There are good jokes, it made me laugh, but more than anything, it's just genuinely compelling television. A tense, violent journey through Springfield as its different characters react to these new killers. There's one scene where the hitman is confronted by Fat Tony and his goons in a diner, and the entire scene just bubbles with this ominous tension before boiling over into a genuinely electric and violent shootout, trapping Flanders in these situations where he has to compromise his own morals in increasingly destructive ways. The episode even dismantling the very idea of Flanders' grandfather, the entire foundation on which those morals were built, raising the idea that Flanders is only able to be Flanders because he's never encountered true evil. It is a genuinely great piece of television, not just because it is in itself compelling, but because it asks a wider question. What is The Simpsons after 30 years on TV, and what can it be? I scored this episode a fucking 9. I never expected that from starting this video. It is evidence that there is life in new era Simpsons, and so I added the scores of season 33 together and averaged them out to discover that season 33 of The Simpsons has a final average score of 6.4. Oh, God, well, that's disappointing. Okay, while season 33 has some of the best episodes of The Simpsons in years, that average is unfortunately dragged down by other episodes. Episodes that lack the individuality and nuance we know the show is now capable of, and fall back on the kind of zany comedy and storytelling we have become all too familiar with. In one episode, an abrasive football player is adopted by Marge and Mr. Burns, and if you think I explained that poorly, you should watch the episode. The crux of the comedy coming from these zany jokes about this grown man being treated like a child. The episode being about Marge and Mr. Burns, but also failing to take into account their relationship in history, which is one of the most interesting of the entire show. And the result is an episode that limps along with all the passion and enthusiasm of that time Usher recorded an Easter message for the Xbox YouTube channel.
Happy Easter, Xbox.
That's the entire video. Other episodes, such as Fat Tony becoming Maggie's godfather or a revelation that Brandine is actually intelligent, poke at interesting ideas but don't do anything with them, ultimately falling into the same problems that plagued season 29 and 30, leaving season 33 in its weaker moments feeling just as scared and identityless as the show has been for decades, placing the entire crux of this video on season 34, the most recent season. And it is within this season there is something I could have never foreseen when I started this video. There is a Tetsuya Naito has a cursed finishing move. The Stardust Press is a top rope spinning body press designed to get the audience as excited as possible and rally them behind the Stardust genius. However, despite this, the crowd never cared about Tetsuya Naito. His entrance met not even with boos, but something much worse: indifference, to the point that Naito left Japan. Years later, he would return as the ungovernable one, now cold, callous, and unruly, refusing to appeal to the crowd or perform the Stardust Press, his way of rejecting the audience who had rejected him. Naito would find massive success in his new ungovernable persona. However, as the years went on, in rare moments of extreme desperation, Naito would try and wind back the clock and attempt the Stardust Press. But every time, it cost him dearly. The only time he's landed the move in 8 years, it failed to end the most important match of Naito's career, his purgatory for trying to relive the past. This is a video about The Simpsons. Season 34 of The Simpsons began airing in October of last year, and it was around that time that renewed interest in the show became palpable. And I was actually kind of nervous hitting play on its first episodes. I wanted to come out of season 34 saying it was a resounding return to form for The Simpsons, but the truth is more complicated. Episodes like Homer buying Marge a Peloton bike could not be a more perfect poster child for the issues that plague modern Simpsons. An entire storyline pulled from a Twitter meme that was popular for maybe a day 6 months before the episode aired, resulting in an empty, borderline nonsensical plot where scenes just kind of crash together like a video essay whose points don't properly lead into one another. Homer gets a little brother, and it's just full of the kind of zany nothing comedy that at this point I am so sick of talking about. Episodes like these made me question what I was even doing making this video. But there's also other episodes that take all the positive changes made by season 33 and take them even further. There's an episode built entirely around Duffman's relationship with his estranged daughter, and Duffman is an interesting character in 2023. Introduced in season 9, Duffman represents an era of corporate marketing where brands would basically scream at you until you bought something, as opposed to, well, whatever they're doing now. That is the comedy at the heart of Duffman's character. He is this living, breathing corporate mascot able to cram his catchphrases into any situation, no matter how inappropriate or mundane.
That brown patch needs a little H2O. Oh yeah!
I love Duffman, but repeating that joke for 30 years is less so beating a dead horse and more so Tien tri-beaming that horse into the center of the earth for 3 decades. I promise that's the last Dragon Ball Z reference. To the point that by season 30, that joke is beyond stale. The comedy drained from its bones like Android 20 absorbing Piccolo's life for fuck. But this episode takes that concept that this character doesn't work anymore and makes that his story. The comedy coming from his good-natured but hopelessly inept attempts to come to terms with modern society and reconnect with his daughter.
Some chicks are guys, and that's okay.
It's okay, Dad. Baby steps.
What I love about this idea is that it's The Simpsons looking at the parts of itself that doesn't work, asking itself difficult questions, and doing something meaningful with them. And I felt that a lot with these episodes, like episode 14, an episode entirely about Carl. If you haven't watched this episode but have enjoyed The Simpsons, I want you to pause and ask, who is Carl? Think of any defining character trait about him beyond the fact that he works in the power plant or stands beside Lenny, and you will soon discover there is no answer to that question. There was even an episode in season 21 where the entire premise was no one really knows anything about Carl. He has no identity. But in this episode, Carl is forced to come to terms with the fact that he doesn't know anything about who he is or even his own culture, leading him on a journey of exploring his own African American heritage, which I don't really have any place commenting on, but the channel ToonrificTariq has an excellent video going in depth on this episode and how successful it is in doing that. Link in the description. It's an episode that meaningfully builds on the improvements we saw in season 33, deprioritizing joke counts in favor of stories that feel real and written by an actual person, drawing their comedy from genuine life experiences. Something you can see across multiple episodes this season, but the part of season 34 that honestly just kind of blew me away were the episodes that take that third improvement, that wider question about what The Simpsons is and can be in 2023, and builds on it even further, resulting in some of the wildest and most experimental episodes the show has ever done. Episodes that dissect and question what it is to be a TV show that's been running this long, pulling apart The Simpsons and reassembling it in strange and bizarre ways. Maybe the best example of this being episode 3, in which two hackers steal secret footage of The Simpsons from Fox that destroys the entire canon of the show, revealing these ludicrous twists on the characters that undo the reality of what The Simpsons is. Lenny is revealed to be a figment of Carl's imagination. Martin is actually an adult cop whose dedication to his undercover beat at Springfield Elementary is destroying his marriage. And the all-purpose incidental guy, you know, this guy,
Found your car keys, big shot. Want that toasted honcho?
is revealed to actually be an insectoid life form that is slowly taking over the town. For as far as season 33 pushed what The Simpsons could be, episodes like this take that idea to a whole other dimension, and it's not the only one. Another takes place entirely through a browser window covering an online scandal involving The Simpsons. Yet another is set in an alternate reality where Bart doesn't exist. And yet another sees the majority of its episodes spent on Homer crashing through a windshield in slow motion as he reflects on his life, his kids, and his relationship with Marge and her disapproving father, even presenting to Homer the idea of what it might mean to be a parent disliking your child's partner. It even has a magic talking fairy played by Lizzo. Everyone loves her, right? However, for as interesting as I find a lot of these episodes, there is one that blows them all away. An episode that takes the concept of reimagining The Simpsons in a direction that is so wild and insane, and it's called Treehouse of Horror 33. As a kid, I remember watching Treehouse of Horror episodes and being shocked at how much more violent and disturbing they were than anything else on primetime TV. They were my first indication that horror was something I was going to be into. That cocktail of genuine fear and chaotic comedy, so strange and impactful, making for some of the best episodes the show has ever produced. The Shinning, Terror at 5.5 Feet, Bad Dream House, Time and Punishment. I'm gonna stop there, but I could keep going. And to me, the big difference between those episodes and modern Treehouse of Horror is that while classic Treehouses embraced their source material and became actually kind of good horror in the process, modern Simpsons tends to roll its eyes at that same source material, becoming more a mockery than a genuine attempt at horror, which is why the first segment of this episode kinda knocked me on my ass. The Pookadook parodies the film The Babadook, seeing Marge become possessed by an evil storybook, after which she begins to try and murder Maggie, and if that concept sounds disturbing, it is. With everything from the cinematography to the sound design pushing this episode just a smidge beyond parody, to the point that it's actually quite frightening.
Oh, peekaboo, I hear you.
Treehouse of Horror has always been a way for the show to try new and weird things, and the Pookadook is such a creepy, ambitious example of that, but even it pales in the face of how much further the second segment of the episode takes that concept. Death Tome is a full-on anime reimagining of The Simpsons, and not only is it kind of shocking to see how beautifully translated The Simpsons world and characters have been transformed into an anime style, it also has some of the best jokes of the entire season, and was so well received that it both went massively viral online and was nominated for a 2022 Annie for Best TV Media, and I get why. This to me is the most fresh, raw, and exciting The Simpsons has felt in years. Watching this episode was the same giddy feeling of watching Treehouse of Horror as a kid and feeling like anything was possible, and yeah, nothing could have prepared me for what was to come in its third and final part. The opening of this segment is bizarre, as we find ourselves in Season 4, Episode 12, Marge versus the Monorail, one of the most beloved episodes in the history of The Simpsons. And it doesn't just look like that episode, it is that episode, right down to the rough analog line quality. And just as it starts to feel like the wrong piece of footage is playing, this happens.
I call the big one Bitey.
Yes!
Two unknown characters, each with 5 fingers, enter the scene and begin quoting The Simpsons.
Oh, let's get high and shoot Mr. Burns.
They're Simpsons fans. Homer starts acting strange, repeating catchphrases and lines from old episodes, who is then dumped in the back of a truck and driven through a street full of Simpsons characters, all performing scenes from classic episodes. This is Simpsons World, a theme park where robotic versions of the Simpsons characters play out Golden Age moments over and over and over, until today, when our malfunctioning Homer becomes self-aware and tries to escape with his family. Earlier in this video, I criticized modern Simpsons for relying too much on references to classic episodes, but the difference here is what this episode says with those references. Take how differently the hedge meme is handled. In season 30, Homer sending Lisa the gif of himself was just this empty reference that didn't mean anything, but here, watch how differently it plays out.
Name! Name! Name!
I'm so sick of that stupid hat!
Oi! 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 Oi!
Homer is furious at this joke, at this meme, at being trapped in this endless, infinitely repeating perception of himself, trapped by the expectation of his audience, and now wanting to be free from it. And if it sounds like I'm reaching here, check out this moment when Marge sees a statue of Matt Groening holding Bart's hand and wrenches it loose, leaving just this image of Bart alone without his original creator. And this moment fucking got me, because I realized this episode is answering the question I've been asking this entire video. What is The Simpsons in 2023? The Simpsons is a show whose past is so beloved, so worshipped, that none of us can move past it. And so we regurgitate our favorite parts endlessly, but in doing so, trapping both the characters and the people who now make this show in an infinite cycle of being compared to the past. And that is what this episode, what this show now is. It's characters and the people who now make it trying to break free, trying to find value in a new future beyond what used to be. That's a fucking incredible piece of metafiction, and it's amazing not because it feels like classic Simpsons, but because it doesn't. Something like this could have never existed in the classic era because it takes into account the decades of references, the countless memes, and the narrative that The Simpsons was only good 25 years ago. A narrative perpetuated by fans like me, and this episode calls us out, and we deserve it. Combined with the other two segments, this was one of my favorite Treehouses of Horror ever, and an absolute high point for The Simpsons of any era. And so when I scored it was easy. I gave it a 10. The very best of what The Simpsons can be in 2023. But would that be enough to nudge season 34 over that line, even with its weaker episodes? And so, when I added up the final score, the result was 6.90909, which, for the sake of justifying this entire fucking video, we're just gonna call a 7. So, there you have it. After a decade-defining television, after the most infamous fall in media history, after spending a quarter of a century as an uncanny zombified version of itself, The Simpsons is good again. Jesus Christ, what the fuck? Like, okay, but how good is it? What do you mean? I mean, like, how good is it compared to... No, please don't say it. Classic Simpsons. No, that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how things used to be. It only matters how they are. You know which season you should review? No, don't say it. Not that. Anything but that. You should review season 6. No, not season 6. For the love of God, not season 6. When are you gonna go back to making Why You Should Watches? No! Defining what classic era Simpsons is actually a little more difficult than you might think. To some, it's the first 10 seasons. To others, it is strictly seasons 3 to 8. But whatever way you want to qualify it, be it TV ratings, IMDb scores, or whatever else, it is unheard of to try and define classic Simpsons without season 6. The precise intersection of the more heartfelt and grounded early Simpsons shot through with the chaotic, razor-sharp comedy of seasons 7 and 8. And if you want evidence of that, you only need to look at the amount of jokes that have survived 30 years of existence. Homer saying this will require all my skill before punching through the alarmed glass, the Gentle Ben talk show, the phone call from God, Free Jones, the Under the Sea musical number, Homer's entire rock bottom interview, stewing in his own juices where his body temperature has reached over 400 degrees, Homer combining cola and Pop Rocks to cause an explosion as he yells, "See you in hell, candy boys," the oxygen tent which he believes gives him sexual powers, Rowdy Roddy Peeper. And here's the thing, all those jokes are fucking immortal, and they are all from the same 22-minute episode. And I would argue it's not even the best episode in season 6. Bart of Darkness is a viciously funny 22 minutes exploring what childhood summer feels like and underscoring that narrative with a hilarious yet genuinely compelling Rear Window parody plot. Treehouse of Horror 5 is possibly the undisputed king of Halloween episodes with The Shinning, Time and Punishment and Nightmare Cafeteria, and Lisa on Ice is maybe my personal favorite episode of all time, equally surgical at creating insanely timeless comedy and genuine sob-inducing moments, a level of quality that is matched by scant few others like Who Shot Mr. Burns, which is also this season. Homer the Great, Homer the Clown, Bart vs. Australia, Lemon of Troy for God's sake, and it's like, of course a season of television like this would create something as massive as what The Simpsons was, an inertia that would propel the show across 30 years and trap it under impossible expectation. And yeah, of course that standard would eventually fall. How could it not? It feels insane to try and apply a numerical score to a piece of media this iconic and impactful, but score it I did, with no episode receiving less than a 9 and nearly half the episodes receiving a 10, for a total score of 9.5. So, where the hell does that leave us? Well, if you're asking me, do I think The Simpsons is good again? Yeah, I really do. If you're asking, is The Simpsons what it was? No, it isn't. The Simpsons Golden Age is over, and whatever the show is or might become, it's never going to be that. Early Simpsons, particularly season 6, is this impossible, iconic thing, a perfect, beloved season of television. It always will be, and it always was. The only thing is, that's not actually true. Like, at all. Remember this review from the start of the video? Well, this is not actually a review for season 34 written in 2023. It is a review of season 6 written in 1994 for the episode Lisa on Ice. And it is not the only one. There's a video essay by the channel The Real Gyms called The Mystery of Golden Age Simpsons, and it raises some really interesting points, but most interesting for our purposes is in relation to these beloved untouchable episodes and how they were not always that. Which The Real Gyms proves by uncovering old Usenet Simpsons episode reviews written by fans of The Simpsons as these episodes were airing, found on simpsonsarchive.com. Listen to what some of them have to say about the most beloved episodes in history. Itchy and Scratchy Land. Well, overall, I thought this episode was very weak. It still followed the season 5 format of methodical writing, showing one joke after another like a tired sitcom, instead of simply throwing a whole bunch of jokes at the audience at once. 2.5 out of 4 stars. I'd have to say this was a pretty mediocre episode, but compared to what has been shown so far this season, it was a marked improvement. This makes my top 5 worst list of all time, easily. Killer Robots? Please. Bart of Darkness. I thought the humor was a little old and didn't come over very evenly. Personally, I thought the rear window thing was way overdone. Are we getting less intelligent or what? Homer the Great. This is the first time I've ever been disappointed by an episode with Homer in its title. First, the plot was simply too unbelievable. Second, many of its gags just didn't work. They were either predictable, stale, cheesy, or just plain embarrassing. Bart vs. Australia. Ouch, that was the single worst Simpsons I've ever seen. I better see some improvements to the show or it will be history soon. Bart's Comet. What the hell? I seem to remember when Simpsons episodes had plots which related to, rather than hopelessly contorting, real life. I have never thought an episode of The Simpsons could be that bad. Lisa on Ice. The stories are no longer clever. Instead, they're complete crap. I think they are trying to fill an obvious lack of story creativity with gags, and it's getting really old. Duh, me lose brain, why I laugh. Grr, who is responsible for last night's monstrosity? He should be forced to apologize on air and then be fired from the show, sterilized and sent to live like an animal in the sewers below Los Angeles for the rest of his life. The episode Bart's Comet is repeatedly cited as an all-time low for the series. There's even mention of something being called the Comet Sucks phenomenon, which was likely an online backlash against this episode. A backlash that, as far as I can tell, has completely disappeared from the internet. There is of course positive reviews in here as well, but I'm focusing on the negative because I think it really shows something. What is so palpable in so many of these reviews is resentment around the feeling that The Simpsons, even by season 6, had changed. And the reason I find that so interesting is because when I read the negative IMDb reviews of season 34, it's that exact same sentiment and tone. Reviews less angry about what the show is and more so about what it no longer was. Simpsons used to have a good plot or two in each episode, but this episode has none at all. I expected a lot better from America's longest running adult cartoon and probably one of the most influential shows to any of the creators whose shows preceded The Simpsons. The Simpsons used to be the most clever cartoon ever made when it started. How did it go from classic episodes telling actual stories which were equally funny, emotionally rewarding, and socially observant to this? If you watch season 34 and don't like it, that's not wrong. There are valid reasons to dislike it on its own merits, but in holding a piece of media to a standard it had 30 years ago when it was created by different people in a different culture in a fucking different era of civilization at this point, I have to ask, how much is to actually be gained by viewing anything through that lens? Even if you retained all the same writers and showrunners and animators who worked on The Simpsons in its prime, do you think that after 30 years they'd want to still make it? That they'd still feel passionately about it? That they'd even be capable of it? I don't think they would. I think instead they'd be making something different but interesting. But I think we got that. I think that's what season 34 is. I got a comment on a video that said something like, anyone else remember when this channel was good? I miss the old channel. Everything he makes now is garbage. Now, granted, I'm removing some slurs and what I'll call gamer rage from that one, but you want to know when I got this comment? I got it 6 years ago, right after I made the original Fall of the Simpsons video. That is how soon people started saying to me that my videos weren't the way they used to be. And honestly, I get it. My videos have changed. I've changed. I have been doing this long enough that on a physical, atomic level, you are watching a different person than who first started making these videos. If I tried to make these videos the way they used to be, why you should watches every 2 to 3 weeks, I can't do that anymore. And I don't want to. Everything changes. And that can make seeing what they are complicated. That can be scary, but it doesn't need to be. When you're looking at media from your past, what are you actually seeing? Are you seeing what it is, or are you remembering how it felt? I don't have a confident answer to that question. When I rewatch season 6, I can't say that a part of the appeal isn't the memory of being younger, life being simpler. And so when I think of that moment from the Simpsons arriving in London airport, was it really that one bad joke that bothered me? Or was it the subtle creeping implication that everything even the TV shows I loved were changing. I don't know. But what I do know is that standing here saying this in my mid-30s is the one thing life has beaten into me, is that the more you expect things to be what they were, the more disappointed and bitter you will become. I think it's really important to remember that. Whether it's watching a cartoon from 30 years ago that's still going, or if you just happen to live that long. Oh, also, that's what the Silent Hill bit was about, and also the wrestling bit. That was obvious, right? Oh, I've ruined the conclusion to this video. Friends, thank you for joining me. If you'd like to support this channel and keep videos like this possible, check out eyepatchwolves.com for some Super Eyepatchwolf merch, or head on over to patreon.com/Super Eyepatchwolf, where you can join this beautiful list of people right here. Special thank you this week to Emmy Ryan, Lenny Face Larry, Base Dash Bomb, Terrifying Spoon, Angela Dario, Evie Winter, and Commander Squeaks. Also check out my second channel, Regular Eyepatchwolf. Friends, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.